Come join the party. We're all going to have such fun. It's a place so wonderful, nobody ever thought to leave.
A standout aspect of the Outlast Trials is its basis in real-world history and psychology. If you're willing to put aside the masochistic police officers and silly gasmen who fart on you, the in-game lore documents are rich with historical integrity, from Cold War politics to scientific theories of the time. Amid the many themes and storylines, the trials themselves embody a principle called behavioral architecture, how structure and design influence human beings' interactions with their environment. On the surface, the trials might seem crude and try-hard, but with a little digging and in-game context in mind, you might find that all those blood and guts barely break the skin as to what's really going on. Before we get into the trials themselves, it's important to first establish a little history, both in-game and real life. A rather obscure mid-20th century figure makes a few appearances in the documents, one Paul Lionel Edward Hallowell. The historical Hallowell was a CIA officer who, in 1951, formed the Sea Supply Corporation, a front that shipped weapons to nationalist Chinese forces in the wake of the Chinese Civil War, which saw the Chinese Communist Party's takeover of the mainland in 1949. The CIA had an active interest in undermining communist regimes, and the Sea Supply Corporation funneling arms to anti-communist rebels was just one of many examples. The game states that Hallowell was also involved with a man named Chiang Kai-shek, leader of the Republic of China until the Communist Party's takeover. Hallowell allegedly supplied heroin to Kai-shek's forces to fund anti-communist activities. Such dealings with narcotics aligned with Project Bluebird, the predecessor to Project Artichoke, which would eventually become MKUltra. To further cement Hallowell's connection to Murkoff, it is implied he was a supervisor to Moses Scarfiotti, an ex-Navy engineer recommended by MKUltra overseer Alan Dulles for the role of Project Lathe's architect. In Scarfiotti's interview, he is keen to highlight Disneyland as a prime example of behavioral architecture and its potential application in the trial environments. In his words, the space moves people through it. The shapes instruct people how to behave. It doesn't matter what you think you want. Just being in Disneyland erases whoever you woke up as this morning. Scarfiotti also reveals he first visited Disneyland on insistence of Hallowell, who likewise saw the value of behavioral architecture, so much so that, around the same time, as a lawyer operating in Florida, Hallowell conspired to create two phantom towns with puppet governments in the Orlando area in order to stake a claim to the land that would become Disney World. Additionally, Scarfiotti likens Disneyland to a cathedral built by Edward Bernays. Bernays was a public relations specialist active throughout the 20th century, although that's a nice way of putting it. The more blunt term for him was propagandist, a label Bernays actually embraced. Along with his advertising campaigns for various corporations and causes, and his role in the CIA's overthrowing of the Guatemalan government in 1954, Bernays proposed a concept of engineered consent, which, in a nutshell, argues that influencing the public to work for the client is the superior method of gathering attention and profit for said client. So, to Scarfiotti, a Bernays cathedral would be one that subliminally compels occupants to move through it on their own volition, rather than asking or telling them to do so. A fitting comparison for the people-moving machine that is Disneyland. Circling back to Outlast, unfortunately there is not much in the documents themselves about the design and psychology of the trial environments. However, it is not difficult to connect the philosophies of Disney and Bernays to them, and it is my hope that this analysis will shed light on how the trials move people and engineer consent. In a conversation with Project Lathe's mechanical engineer Cornelius Noakes, Scarfiotti mentions that every element of the trials is carefully placed and adjusted for maximum psychological impact, to the point where even a single radio emitting odd static could disrupt their integrity. A seemingly throwaway line, but one whose significance means everything. Among the more mundane and obvious consistencies across the trials are the directional signs. Yes, we're talking about signs with words on them now, but bear with me. Each trial is littered with cartoonish signs following the same basic design and font that point the way to important locations. Despite the variable environments, the signs are one of few things that reagents can realistically expect when they enter a new map. Not only do they serve their intended purpose, but the visual consistency is a comfort, a boost, a reassurance that reagents have a task, and that they are goaded to perform it well. As president of Walt Disney Imagineering, Marty Sklar proposed Mickey's 10 Commandments, a code of standards any creator of experiences ought to follow to make their brand stick. And sure enough, maintaining identity is number 8 on that list. According to a piece by Choice Hacking, a marketing psychology firm, Commandment 8 adheres to the mere exposure effect, the notion that consistency trumps quality when it comes to branding. The more a customer sees a consistent message, the more they'll internalize it, even if other messages are better. Just as Disneyland builds a brand with its familiar mascots and imagery, Scarfiotti knew that maintaining consistent visual cues across the trials was important for reagent retention and motivation. But again, signposts are the most mundane of these examples. In conversations with Easterman, the Doctor expresses his insistence on deploying symbology throughout the trials, the symbols on playing cards, along with rabbits, moons, eyes, and flames, all of which represent luck. These symbols appear across several main trials, and all are fundamental aspects of reagents' missions. The consistency is apparent, but codifying these symbols fulfills another of Mickey's 10 Commandments. Number 5, communicate with visual literacy. In short, pictures convey ideas and attitudes better than any amount of lecturing or explaining ever could. But what idea are these symbols trying to propose? Easterman likens a murderer prosecuted for his crimes to punishment for being competent, or, which he considers more probable, being lucky. The symbols, according to him, are emblems of the trial's primary thesis. The reward for success is suffering, and this is a good thing, since as the trials invariably result in suffering, to suffer is to succeed. If these ideas sound convoluted, it's because they are, and both Scarfiotti and Easterman agree, which is precisely why symbols are a much better distribution system for set ideas than flat-out telling reagents what they need to learn. This is known as the picture superiority effect. Images are easier to remember and understand than words. Likewise, Disney has pioneered visual literacy. Why tell its guests what to think and feel? That's too much work. Why even have a fully fledged mascot to make them feel safe and nostalgic and forget about real life? All they need is 3 circles. And all you need is those 3 circles to hear the music, and smell the carnival food, and feel like a kid again. Excited, carefree, trusting. The symbols don't tell people what to do. They move them through the space, make them the cogs in the client's machine. And all the while, the people, park guests, reagents, assume they're acting of their own volition. Bernays would have laughed at that assumption. Some of Mickey's commandments manifest in more tangible examples. With each trial, reagents are not just doing missions, but they're partaking in stories. Reagents are the protagonists, and each trial has a problem, be it a snitch, a boat full of naughty children, or an inappropriate toy about to hit the market. There's antagonists in the form of the prime assets, and there's conflict, rising action, falling action, and a resolution, all familiar terms to anyone who's read or studied stories. In the context of Imagineering, Commandment 3 states, organize the flow of people and ideas. Says Sklar, great stories and great experiences have a logic and sequence that pays off for your guests for the time and effort they have put in. The technical term for this is narrative bias. People trust, remember, and become emotionally invested in stories. What better way to instill the lessons of the trials than by telling a story? The trial that best presents a narrative, in my opinion, is Vindicate the Guilty. The whole mission is basically a courtroom drama, made explicit by the televised sequence that plays at the start.
To think I would even be capable of kidnapping, torturing, and outraging so many people is patently absurd.
We trust that even if the judge insists on perpetrating this perverse obsession with evidence and facts, higher powers will intervene to assure my client's innocence.
Throughout the story, reagents are forced to carry out this sham trial, simultaneously the protagonist and a captive audience to the unfurling horror. This apparent contradiction weaves in 2 principles seen across Disneyland. 1. Avoid overload, which is Commandment 6, stating that too many options makes guests feel unhappy, so limiting choices makes them feel better about the option they choose. While the trials are more extreme in that there is only one way to do it, compelling reagents to destroy evidence, silence witnesses, and execute a judge becomes a lot more palatable when these actions are the only option, or the only way out. The trial makes them want to do it, and makes them okay with it. 2. Walt Disney was adamant of the virtue of immersion, making guests feel like they were part of something greater, rather than just mere observers. Guests feeling like characters in storybook fantasy lands compelled them to make decisions and push forward and play along, which is precisely the product Disney and Murkoff want to sell. The movement. The illusion of consent. The fourth of Mickey's commandments deals with weenies, which do, but also don't, refer to hot dogs. Disney referred to prominent visual markers throughout the park as weenies, comparing them to sausages that attract dogs, i.e. park guests. Not only do these weenies serve as reference points, but they are positioned in such a way to attract and guide guests throughout the park. This is referred to as visual salience, the prominence and emotional resonance of an object. Though you might not be able to explain it, in Disney parks, you'll find yourself inevitably drawn to weenies. And if this language sounds familiar to the gamers out there, in the game design sector, this is referred to as wayfinding, the explicit and implicit methods of guiding players through a level. Obviously, the developers at Red Barrels understand this and design their games with wayfinding in mind, but in context of in-game lore, it would seem that Scarfiotti took additional inspiration from Walt Disney and applied some nascent game design to the Trials. Although the environments contain several landmarks that could be considered weenies, I'd like to highlight two. Firstly, in the fun park, you'd think that the giant gaping mouth with neon letters would be a weenie, but I think that distinction better goes to the diner. Its location in the center of the carnival, its conspicuous square shape, its branding, its purpose as a hub for stocking up on ammunition. Whenever I run this trial, I always find myself gravitating towards the diner, even sometimes cutting through it just to get to the root canal. Its placement, its subliminal associations with safety and resetting, I think everyone knew what they were doing with this building. Secondly, and more apparently, is the boat in the docks. Easterman explicitly designated the Angelina as a strong psychological symbol, but even its physical design is meant to stand out. It's massive. It's blood red, clashing with the blues, grays, and browns of the docks. It's situated at the center of the trial. Even disregarding its significance as a main objective, one would still find themselves drawn to the Angelina. Other parallels lie in the idle X-Pops, which at first are portrayed as unassuming, if not arbitrary, simple obstacles that keep reagents on their toes. But considering Scarfiotti's insistence on careful, deliberate placement of environmental elements, there could be a greater purpose beyond the occasional punch scare. The majority of the time, idle X-Pops are placed outside or just within the main trial buildings, almost never throughout the main mission, and they're almost always rambling about the horrors reagents are about to encounter.
Fuck around in the basement, ladies, and they're gonna find out.
I can't help but think of Disney cast members, in character, waving and smiling along as guests funnel through queue lines to their attractions, further sinking them into the immersion of the experience Murkoff is trying to sell. It's logical to assume that if Scarfiotti or Easterman didn't want these idle X-Pops hanging around, babbling on about oncoming torture and doom, they'd remove them. Everything has a purpose in the trials. And the televisions that occupy guests in queue lines with promises of what's to come, subliminally compelling them forward, draw parallels to the omnipresent televisions that guide and compel reagents through the trials. And yet another example, screamers are deployed throughout the trial environment strategically. As Dr. Easterman puts it, they're meant to encourage a slower, more contemplative approach to the therapy. Just as the hot asphalt on Main Street encourages movement among the crowds and into the shops, screamers also incentivize preferred movement, albeit of a different sort. Next, we'll highlight the prime assets, which I believe are analogous to mascots at Disney parks. The parallels are many. Posters depicting their image around the environments, the fact that they're confined to their realms, them emerging from monster closets the same way Disney cast members emerge from utilidors. But there is a totemic quality to both prime assets and Disney mascots. Mickey Mouse has ingrained himself in the public subconscious to the point where 3 circles denote his identity, and can trigger a flood of associations and reactions within a consumer. Mickey is a social magnet, a presence that draws children and adults alike. He is the sun, that's S-U-N, of Disney parks. A shining beacon that means the world to many, a comparison that Easterman has invoked in his own writings. Easterman believes that the sun is the font of all charisma, the one true god mankind has looked upon and worshipped consistently throughout history. This sort of charisma is one embodied in the prime asset tropes Easterman is fascinated with, from the historical Adolf Hitler and Ho Chi Minh, to the in-game Coil, Gooseberry, and Franco. Ancient cultures looked to the sun and composed frenzied rituals around its power. Hitler turned onlookers into rioters by mere performance. Disney mascots emerged to cheering crowds and have cemented themselves into American culture. And not only do the prime assets sway the X-Pops, but they sway the reagents in their sheer terror and their totemic attributes burning into reagents' minds. These are all things that would blind you if you stared at them for too long. That's the power of charisma, attribution. That's the power of the sun. And finally, I'd like to highlight an initially unlikely character in context of this discussion, Doris Ritter, the Shadowy Dame, a former reagent who now spends her days in the sleep room dealing contraband. Along with her grizzled appearance and tumultuous backstory, Doris expresses her desire to stay in the Signala facility, not go out into the world. She reveals that with so many reborn reagents out there, things have been irreparably changed, to the point of the world being crazier than the trials.
What I can't stop thinking about is how many of you have been reborn, have been released into the world. Maybe that's why I don't want to make it out here.
Outlast has always been an excessive franchise. Though dabbling in serious themes, its comic tendencies and excessive gore have consistently towed the line with schlock. When I first started playing Trials, I noticed how they had upped the depravity and humor to almost funhouse levels, and concluded that Outlast was nosediving into the realm of comedy horror. Now, I think the opposite. Yes, the Trials are obscenely excessive, and I find myself laughing more than cringing at their contents. But when compared to the Cold War brewing outside, the meddling in world politics, the morbid fates awaiting many reagents, I find myself almost retreating to the comfort and familiarity of the Trials. I could be reborn, go out into the world, and most likely suffer a terrible death with no memory of who I was or what I've done. Or I could just keep hammering out those A+, messing with the X-Pops, exploring the trial environments, all in the good company of my friends. After all, the game's supposed to be fun. Why would anyone ever think to leave? Hey everyone, thanks for watching. This video was a lot of fun to make, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to continue to see more content like this. And if you really want to support me, then consider checking out my 2 books, Hell's Gulf and The God Tide. They're both dark fantasy, absurdist horror comedies, all set in the same North Florida beach town, and if that isn't scary, I don't know what is. Take care, and I'll see you all next time.